I think we can start. Hello everyone again. This is our 20th meetup for QAIst and second online one and first international one. We met with Tariq, I think 2 months ago, right? In Istanbul. He is from New York and we invited him to present something for us in QAIst and luckily he accepted us. Today, he will talk about testing techniques and best practices in United States. It's your turn, Tariq.
Okay. Thank you, Omurdan. Thank you for the introduction. Merhaba, everyone. Hoş geldiniz. As Omurdan said, today we'll talk about best practices in test automation, mainly based on my personal experience in our company here in New York, or within my connections and friends who work on other tech companies here also, in addition to a little bit more research. And I apologize today, is the talk is gonna be in English. My Turkish is not that good, but hopefully, inshallah, in the near future, I can give a talk completely in Turkish, but I'm working on it so far. So you are welcome to interrupt me and stop me at any time with any question in your mind, either in English or Turkish. If I didn't understand the Turkish question, maybe Omurdan can help in translate.
Yeah, I can translate.
Yeah, so let me share my screen. And Omurdan, please, if you can confirm to me if you can see this, that's awesome.
Yes, it's okay.
Okay, great. So let me start with introducing myself. Again, my name is Tariq. I am from Jordan, but I live in the US. My wife is Turkish. That's why I am a member of this group. I work in a company called Turbonomic as a QA manager. And we have one software. It's a hybrid cloud control platform. If you have any question about myself or the company, you can ping me or ask me questions after the talk. But any question that you have regarding whatever we will talk about today, you can interrupt me and ask a question anytime.
Arkadaşlar müzik geliyor birinden ama Çağan muhtemelen senden. Kapatabilir miyiz?
Ama güzel şarkı ya. Tamam. So next, today I'll cover the following topics. I will talk about why do we automate testing initially, and which test automation framework we should use, which tests that we should automate, what are the different test cases, design types, little bit about best practices in Selenium, and then the importance of communicating value of automating and test automation in general. So this is the main summary of today. The talk is not going to be that long, so bear with me. So at the beginning, as a disclaimer, again, the practices that I will talk about today, that doesn't mean that they are the best one globally, and there are no better practices, but those are the best practices that I observed and we applied in our company, and also that I observed that my friends and my connections in other tech companies in the US that also are applying. All right, so why do we automate testing? A lot of us actually know that, but it's very important to emphasize on it. First, of course, to catch bugs and detect problems. That the main reason for that. Second is to save total testing time. That's also very important. And when you save total testing time because you have now a portion is automated, then that means you're saving money as well. And also to increase the testing coverage. That means if you have a huge set of test cases that you need to run for any application, if you have a lot of automation coverage that allows you to also test more, that increases your total test coverage. And by default also, that gives you more time to focus on other areas of testing, like performance or exploratory testing. So that's also very important. So there are also areas that you cannot actually cover manually. You have to use automated tools to automate them. For example, when you do performance or load testing, if you want to load the database with a huge number of data, you cannot do that manually. You have to use automation. So automation is very powerful in this area. And also we hear some words when we talk about the value of automation and why do we automate, like continuity, reliability, reusability, which means, like, of course, these test cases that we automate, we can run them at any time we want. They are reliable because they execute the same steps over and over again. And they are reusable, of course, because we can run them at any time we want. So just to emphasize on the importance of automation, I had this slide here, and then I'll continue now. So this is a very important concept when we talk about testing or automation in general. There is a guy named Mike Cohen. He came up with the concept of the testing pyramid, which states that the majority of automation should go at the bottom of the pyramid. So the majority of automation should be actually unit testing done generally by developers to add unit tests for the application that they are developing. We have a smaller portion of that as integration tests, and also API tests are part of that. And then you have a smaller portion as end-to-end tests or UI test cases as we know of. And then you have a little bit of extra steps that you need to do in terms of manual testing that is illustrated in this cloud here. So as you see, as illustrated in this pyramid, the concept is to do as much as you can in unit testing and then build up based on it. Then integration tests, then end-to-end test cases, and with a little bit of manual testing. So this is the best practice that this guy, Mike Cohen, suggested. But the problem is right now in most of companies, and we are one of them, honestly, is that we didn't do this. So initially, you don't have a huge coverage of automated unit tests. You start by just writing code for your program or for your system, and then you ignore that part, which is writing unit tests. And you have only a small coverage of unit tests, and that forces you to add more test cases when it comes to integration tests. And then that forces you to have a huge set of end-to-end test cases or UI test cases or whatever you call it. And then when you have that huge set of automated tests that you need to do from an end user perspective, that means also you have a huge set of manual test cases that you need to do, that you need to execute. And then you will discover a lot of bugs because the very basic testing, which is in unit test, is not covered. So this is referred to as the ice cream cone because it looks like an ice cream cone like this, which is really not a good practice in any software developing company. The best practice is, as this guy just suggested, and also as the industry is pushing for, is going for this model, or other people also refer to it as test-driven development, which is you write the test cases first, then you develop the software. Okay, so let me move on. So now let's talk a little bit about what kind of test automation frameworks to use. So let's assume that you are in a company, you have only manual testing right now, and you decide actually to start investing in test automation, and you want to use an automation framework. So there are two main schools or two main ideas when it comes to this, what kind of automation framework you should use. The first one, it says that you should actually pick a framework that uses a programming language similar to what engineering is using. For example, if you work in a software company that has a software written in Java, it is very and highly recommended to use an automation framework that is also using Java. So that's one idea. The other idea is to choose a framework that aligns with the skills of your QA team. So if I have the same example, our product is Java, then maybe it doesn't make sense to choose a Java-based test automation framework if all of your QA engineers, they don't know Java, let's say that they know Python, then maybe the best practice here is to go with a Python-based automation framework. Based on my own experience, the best actually path to go for is the first one, because it really helps you as a QA team and also overall as an organization, that you can have this immediate collaboration between the QA team and also engineering or developers team. And then there will be an ability of sharing ideas, reviewing codes, collaboration in writing test cases. So it's very high value for the future. We tried also this first for ourselves and our team to choose a framework that is aligned with the QA team, but it wasn't that good, honestly. And then we pushed for a framework that what the engineering is using. And then we learned that even the learning curve for our QA engineers to learn the language is very high, so it's not a problem. And this is just like to show you all the different examples of different frameworks that people use. For example, we have a lot of even different categories of frameworks. We have unit testing frameworks like TestNG and JUnit. We have browser drivers like Selenium. We have behavioral-driven frameworks like Cucumber, also a little bit Fitness. We have keyword-driven frameworks like Robot. We have load-driven testing like JMeter, and we have frameworks that are related to mobile development applications like Appium or Robotium. So these are popular, but they are not the only popular ones. So I just wanted to mention some of them. So next I will tell you guys what are the big tech companies use. The major companies, what do they actually use when they automate testing? So if you remember the testing pyramid, actually the big companies now are pushing for that model, to write most of the automated tests as unit tests, and then little bit coverage and integration and end-to-end. So that's as a general concept, but to dive deep more into what the actually tech companies use here in the US, first, a lot of the tech companies actually, they develop their own test automation framework. They don't use an open source one like the ones that I showed. They actually develop their own, and they either outsource it so that other people can use it, or it's actually enclosed within the same company. What's an example of that? For example, Facebook developed their own testing framework, test automation framework. It's called Jest. So this framework is actually open source, and anyone can use it. So this is an example of it. But other companies also, like Google and Microsoft, and also Apple, they develop their own testing frameworks that they are not publishing for people to use. So that's one kind. The other kind is that as I mentioned, most of the tech giants actually rely heavily on unit tests, and they have dedicated teams to write unit tests, and those they call them as SDETs, or software development engineer and test. For example, Amazon. Of course, Amazon is a huge company, but a lot of different teams. I have friends in the company, and most of them, they are using JUnit as a unit testing framework to write unit test cases. And also Microsoft, they use also a similar framework called NUnit, which is similar to JUnit and TestNG, but of course, it is using Microsoft technology in terms of programming languages to write unit tests. So they are using that. So LinkedIn is a smaller, little bit kind of company, but they use mainly TestNG, and also they use Selenium as a test driver, as a browser driver to write UI tests. But in terms of unit tests, they use TestNG. Google also is a massive, huge company. They have so many different teams, and each team they use their own kind of frameworks, or also they use a combination of different frameworks. So based on my investigation and some of the friends that I have, so those teams, they use different things. Also, they use JUnit to write unit tests. And also they use something called Mockito to mark behaviors of certain code, and then they can assert or do some kind of verifications. And both of them, we know probably JUnit, but Mockito also is open source. Anyone can use it. So this slide, yeah, just I wanted to share with you guys some information about what those companies use when they automate testing. What we can take out of this slide is the majority of big companies, they actually rely more on unit testing rather than end-to-end testing. Okay, so next. So now it's very important also if we decide that let's go with a specific framework, then the next decision that we need to make is what are the test cases that we need to automate. It's a very important decision, of course. So first, probably that's common sense, repetitive tests. Any tests that you keep repeating all over again. Examples of those, regression testings for each release that you have, or what we call BVT or build verification tests, which are a group of tests that you need to run before releasing each build. Some people call them smoke tests as well. So these are repetitive test cases, and they are a great candidate for automation, and they will deliver great value because you're going to keep repeating and running them all over again. So that's one example of where to focus. Next one is time-consuming tests. For example, if you need to do upgrade or update testing from a version to another version, so that's a time-consuming test because you need to prepare the application before the update and then after the update, and then you need to do the update, and there is a lot of assertions that you need to do. So it's time-consuming. So it's a very good candidate for automation. Another type is tests with multiple datasets. Here comes the value of the data-driven tests. For example, when we have API or browser-based test cases with a lot of different fields and a lot of different combinations of the same test case model, then it's a very important and very good candidate to automate those kind of test cases. So another one is performance testing, of course. I already mentioned about the part that is very difficult to use manually is to load, let's say, databases, or to load network, or to load any kind of module in your application. Doing that in automation is much easier and much reliable for the future. So it's a great candidate for automation as well. So those are the main things that I wanted to share with you guys about how to decide which tests or to automate. Maybe there are additional points, but these are probably the most important ones. So this is just a slide that I will tell you about the most two popular test case designs. The first one on the left, it's called workflow model, which is the normal one that we know, which is when you have a sequence of test cases getting executed after each other, either if they depend on each other or not. But this type or this model, we call it workflow model. The other one is the data-driven, which I mentioned briefly a minute ago, which is you have a test template or one code or one logic of steps to execute, and this logic is shared among a lot of different test cases. So this is referred to as data-driven, and then for each logic or for each test case, you feed different inputs. So probably there are different types of test cases or test case designs, but these are the two most popular ones. And for the data-driven, there are specific also frameworks that focus mainly on this. And there are also frameworks, of course, that support both models. Next, so I have just few best practices that we use when also we write Selenium tests, and also a lot of other companies they use. So for example, this is something that I noticed in almost all the companies that they use Selenium, which is they use the page object design pattern, which is a very easy design pattern, but the main concept is that each web page, it's represented in code as a class, and then the way you interact with each element in the class is represented as methods in that class. So it's a very simple design pattern, and it's very well documented. You can see a lot of examples online, but it's really useful, and it saves a lot of time for you when you maintain tests in the future or to reduce a lot of duplication. So it's a very important model to use, and I noticed almost all companies that they use Selenium, they actually use this design pattern to develop their framework. So this is one advice for me. And then the next one is regarding when you locate elements in Selenium, is to push for using IDs or names for web elements. So for example, in our case, engineers, when they develop the UI side of the product, they used not to focus on adding IDs for elements. And we had to push for that and force them to add IDs for all the elements that they develop, because it makes it easier for us when we write Selenium test cases to locate those elements and then, of course, operate automated tests based on them. So it's a very important thing to focus on. Some cases, we have dynamically created elements, as you guys know. So for those ones, it's very difficult to use ID or name for the element. For that case, using XPath is probably one of the only solutions. Also, this one is, it's also very important, is to use waits rather than sleep. Sometimes you need to, when you run your tests, you need to wait for a specific action to happen on the UI. You need for the page to load. You need to for a drop-down list to get populated. So it's a very best practice to use wait rather than sleeping. And a lot of these frameworks that you can use with Selenium, they already support this feature, which is waiting for an action to happen on the UI. As I said, waiting for the page to be loaded, or waiting, of course, for a specific time, and you can specify a timeout. And another example, waiting for a drop-down list to get populated, waiting for a button to show up. But it's very important to focus on this rather than sleeping and wasting time and trying to calculate with your mind how long this will take. Waiting will save you time. And also, this is another good practice, not only in Selenium and other also frameworks, is to use soft assertions. So soft assertions are, it's similar as the basic assertion that you do in the test case. But when you do a soft assert, it doesn't fail the test if the assertion failed. It waits until all the assertions that happened in the test, and then the last one, it will collect all the results and then fail at one time. So this is useful if you have multiple assertions you want to use within the same test case. If you have multiple assertions, then using soft assertions is really helpful. Okay, so that's it for Selenium. I have just a few points that I need to share with you, and these are the ones. So the next one is, it's a very important topic, which is a lot of teams in other companies that they are not doing, which is communicating the value of automated tests that you write. So if you have those kinds of managers, for us we have, that they focus on, for us to show them the ROI, or the ROI stands for return of investment, which means, in other words, what is the value that you are giving me as a company when you automate all of these test cases? Because I invest in you. You are writing code, you are writing test cases, which I don't see the value immediately, because they have a value in the future. So in the future, you need to prove to me that my investment actually worth. So I need to see that what you are developing in terms of automated tests is giving me the value that I need. So communicating that value to either colleagues, managers, stakeholders, whoever in the company, whoever is asking for, is very important. So I will tell you a few things that you might want to focus on to collect data for and display this data and communicate the value to the managers or the stakeholders. So first is to track the number of automated tests added across time. This is important and this is very basic to do. And the basic things to see, this is of course just an example. The basic thing to see or the ideal thing to see is to have a slope or you have a curve going up all the way because you are increasing the number of test cases that you automate. So it makes sense that you have an upward slope going up by time. Something else also, of course, you can show is how many test cases that you have automated compared to manual test cases. For example, in this case, we have total of 351 test cases. 101 of them are automated, which corresponds to 29% of the whole suite. Of course, this is just an example, just to show you how such information can be displayed and presented. So this is one of them, track the number of automated tests across time. Another one is track the number of automated tests that run against each release. So if you are working in a software company, that means you have continuous releases, either in a quarterly basis, annual basis, weekly basis, monthly basis. It depends on your release strategy. But we assume that since you add a lot of test cases by time goes on, then for each release that you test, then you have different number of test cases that ran against that release. For example, this is how this could be conveyed. For example, you have releases from, let's say, these are example of versions from 1.5 until 2.1. Also, the assumption is to see those number of test cases increases over time. So, for example, you have almost 61 automated test cases that you ran against 1.5, and then against 2.1, you have close to 90 test cases. So this increase, this gradual increase is normal and it's preferable. If you have a decrease, then there is a problem here. There is something going wrong, right? So, but this is a very important value to show. Another one that I love showing, that's my favorite, which is track the bugs that are caught by automated tests. So that we know that we have automated tests that are running continuously. Sometimes this case fails for just flaky reasons. Sometimes they fail for actual reasons, that something is broken in the product. So then you will go and you file a bug in whatever bug management system that you use. If you're using Bugzilla or Jira or whatever, then you go and you create a bug, right? So it's very important to track those bugs, to add specific tags to them or labels to identify that those are created because of a failed automated tests. And then in the future, you can go to your managers and say, so these are the number of automated tests, these are the number of bugs that we found using those automated tests, and those are the bugs that we found by manually testing. For example, in this chart, we are saying that bugs found by automation are 55 bugs. That corresponds to 15% of total bugs. And then the bugs that we found by manual testing is 300. And of course, you can apply this across a specific period of time or annual basis. Let's say in 2018, how many bugs we found, either manual or testing. So whatever you want to manage it, but it's a very important value to communicate. And we are asked about this all the time. So we are continuously tracking the bugs that we file based on failure in automated tests. All right, so next is to show the time that you save by using those automated tests. So since we assume that those automated tests, they substitute the work of a human, so that means you are saving time. So that means it's a very important also value to communicate to managers. Let me show you an example. Let's assume that you have total of 351 test cases in your environment. You have 101 are automated, which corresponds to 29%, and the rest are manual, right? So what is the value that you will communicate now in terms of time substituted or time saved for managers? So let's assume here you need to do some assumptions. The assumption that I made is that a human can run 25 tests per day. So if we divide 351, assuming that all these tests, they are done manually by humans, then dividing by 25 tests per day, that gives us 14 days to complete all test cases by one person. Now, assuming that now we have 101 are automated, then we need to divide 250, which is our manual, by 25. That gives us 10 days for the whole total number of tests to finish. That means we saved 4 days in terms of manual testing or human-based manual testing. So that's a huge value to save, because when you communicate to managers that you saved time, that means also you saved money, because that requires additional people to test, that requires additional time to test. So for them, time equals money. Okay, so that's the fourth value that is very important to communicate. The other one is which is very probably popular by a lot of the different teams, which is code coverage. Code coverage, as probably you know, is just to show the amount of code that you are touching by writing or by executing all of these different test cases. And for code coverage, we have a lot of popular tools. If you have a Java-based application, then Jacoco is very popular. And if you have a Python-based application, then there is a module called coverage.py, which is also very popular in tracking and calculating code coverage. Yeah, so that's it. So for communication, the value, which is very important, and I advise all of you to track and do. These are the 5 main things that I personally advise, and also the industry advises to communicate to stakeholders and managers to show the value of automation. So now, a best practice in the test cases management system. So of course, all of us, since we are all in QA, then we have a lot of test cases to manage, to document them, to track them. So a lot of companies, we are one of them, rather than using Excel sheets and documents to document these test cases and track them, we use an application to do that. So one of the famous, or 2 of the most famous applications that a lot of companies use are TestRail, which is what we personally use, and also Zephyr. Zephyr is a plugin in Jira. If you're using Jira, that's also popular among a lot of companies to use to document test cases, to track regressions and testing cycles among them. So these are 2 famous ones that I noticed across the industry. So I advise also to use one of those. If you are using one of those, it's very important to utilize and use the API for that tool. For example, if you are using TestRail to document test cases and to manage testing cycles, then using the API is very important, specifically when you run an automated test, and then automatically after the test is done, to send the result of that automated test, if it's passed or failed, to the test case management system that you are using its own API. So we are doing that personally, and it's very useful to have one place, which is TestRail on our side, to track all the work done for a specific release, for testing a specific release, either if that test case is done manually or automatically. Okay, so this is the last slide that I have, which is it is a very important practice that you need to have it as a culture in your team or company, which is to attack really bad tests. Now, probably we all suffer through that, which is if you have a huge number of tests, then it's more likely to have slow tests or flaky tests that sometimes they fail, sometimes they pass. So really based on my experience and the conversation that I had with my colleagues and my connections in other companies, it's very important to give this a priority, which is to attack those bad tests and resolve them as soon as possible, because one flaky test, one bad test will just destroy the reliability of your tests. No one will rely on the tests if it has one at least a test case that is flaky, and from sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it passes, sometimes it doesn't. So it is very important to dedicate time to ensure that the test cases are reliable, the test cases they assess correctly the quality of your product. And the only way to do that, in addition, of course, to increase the coverage, is to resolve all of these flaky and slow tests and make sure that your tests are as stable as possible. So that's the last thing that I wanted to share with you guys. If you have any thought, anything, any personal experience, if you want to tell us about what you use in your company, if you have any question, please, this is the time.
Thank you, Tariq. I have a question. How many QAs do you have, and what's your automation strategy in general?
Yeah, thank you, Amurdan. So in total, we have 32 QA engineers that are divided in 3 different teams. Let me stop sharing so you can guys see me clearly. So yeah, so we have 3 main teams. One is a team that I manage, which is back-end automation. We care about API testing and anything that is not UI. We have another team that is dedicated to UI automation, which is using Selenium. And we have a third team that is mainly dedicated to manual testing, and they take care of releases and regressions, etc.
What's the percentage in general, manual testing and automation testing?
Say that again, Umurda.
What's the percentage of people in manual and automation testing?
Yeah, so let me calculate the percentage, but we have, in my team, I have 6 people, and also 6 people in UI automation, and all the rest are in core. We call it core services, but you can call it manual testing. So if you say total is 6 and 6, 12 over 32, that means we're talking about close to 40% automation and 60% manual.
I see.
Okay. And for the frameworks that we use, in my team, we are using TestNG to write test cases, and we're also using Robot Framework for API test cases. We are using, for the API framework also, recently we started using Rest Assured with TestNG, which is a very also easy framework to use. I know that Sinan and Errol talked about a lot of frameworks before. Like Sinan, I remember he talked about Selenium and Behave. I remember Errol, he talked about Karate for API testing. Karate also is popular a little bit now for people who don't want to deal with code-based frameworks, but for people who want to write code, to write API test cases, Rest Assured is very popular, and we started to use it. For the UI team, they use TestNG with Selenium.
And Robot, I think.
Robot, we only use it as a back-end test automation.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. For UI, they use only TestNG to run the test cases, and Selenium as the web driver.
And lastly, what's the challenges for automation in your team?
So one of the big challenges, which is the last one that I showed, which is flaky tests. So now we have about 1,500, which is 1,500 test cases in total, around that number. So once you increase the number of test cases, your coverage is increased, which is great, but the possibility of having flaky tests increase. So we give a priority for this a lot now to resolve all of these issues. Any test that is flaky, we don't want it. We immediately disable it and work on it until we redesign the test case itself and correct it in a way to make sure that it is stable and it doesn't give me false failures. So that's one of the challenges. One challenge, which is a little bit less, which is when you switch between a framework to framework, you have some learning curve here and you have some coaching to do for your team members. But it's not like a big challenge. If you work closely with your team members, within like a week or two, everything is resolved and you have a framework up and running, and then you can start adding the coverage. Another challenge is we tend to be, as QA engineers, we are like we are conservative to ourselves, and we don't communicate the value to the rest of the engineering team. So it's very important to, if you are the team lead or the manager, is always to communicate the value of what you are doing and what your team is doing to the rest of the company. So yeah, those ones.
Okay. Arkadaşlar sorunuz var mı?
Tamam, so it seems we're good. All right, so I really thank you guys for attending. Again, someone asked, which test reporting program do you use? So we use TestRail. As if you are referring to the documentation where to document the test cases, as we use TestRail. If you are referring to when you run the test cases themselves, what is the logging or reporting system? So it's different. For example, for Robot Framework, it already has the reporting tools built in, and it's great and very clear, so we use that. For the test cases that we write in TestNG, we are using something called Extent Reporter. Let me write it down. It's an open source reporter that is very easy to use and also very clear to review. And this is very useful for when you write unit tests specifically, either in TestNG or JUnit or any kind of unit testing. And probably it's Java based. For us, we are Java based, so we use it. But also this is another good reporting tool to use. But mainly for the test cases management, we use TestRail. What do you think about Allure? Yeah, so I heard about Allure, but I personally didn't use it. So I can't share with you any experience. Do you do any desktop application test? No, because we have one software as a company, and it's a web-based application. You're welcome.
Hello, Tariq.
Hello.
Let me say something. I am Miraj. Thank you very much for your presentation. And will you share your presentation slides?
Yeah, definitely. I will send them to Umurdan, and I guess Umurdan can attach them or share them with you guys.
Yes, I can share it in Meetup page, or I can send via email.
Okay, thank you very much as well, Umurdan, for your helps. Thank you very much. Bye.
You're welcome, Miraj. So another question, are you triggering your tests by manual or triggering? Okay, excellent question. So I didn't mention that. Yeah, we are using Jenkins. We are using Jenkins for everything about CI or continuous integration. We are using Jenkins for from an engineering part to build the product that we are developing, and also we are using Jenkins to run the automated tests. I hope that answered your question. Okay, you're welcome.
Any other questions? I think no.
Okay,
Thank
so
you again.
You're welcome.
We will publish this video in YouTube also, and our next meetup will be in our new office in Istanbul, in Kadıköy. You're welcome, and I will. There is no one yet, but I will inform you.
Tamam.
Meetup group.
And hayırlı olsun for the new office.
Teşekkürler.
Rica ederim. So we have another question, if you don't mind, Omurdan.
Of course.
Yeah, from Jagan. Do you trigger your test when you take an error? So I'm not clear about your question. Do you mean when we report a bug, or when a test case is failed, do we trigger the test again? Like, do we rerun the test again? Jagan, I don't know if you can elaborate more. I would be appreciated. Yeah, so yes, so we have a retry mechanism. Yeah, so for both, for robot framework, because in our team we have two different frameworks that we use. We use TestNG and we use robot framework. So robot framework, it has its own feature to rerun failed tests, and you can configure that in the POM file. We are using Maven. So in the pom.xml file, you can configure robot to rerun specific test cases. For Selenium as well, yes, but not our team. The other team is also using the retry mechanism in TestNG to rerun the test cases if they fail. Yes. So good question. So we started using JUnit, and then we moved to TestNG. One of the main reasons we moved to TestNG is TestNG is very good when it comes to data-driven tests. And TestNG, it's built in to have the data sources section, which is for running data-driven tests. You have one test case with specific steps. Then you can feed that test case data from outside files. For example, you can write CSV files or XML files that has different rows of data, and then you can feed that file to the test case, and then the test case will be run actually multiple times based on the number of rows that you have in that file, and then you achieve the data-driven model in an easy way. So that concept of feeding data from an outside file is not supported by default by JUnit. Probably it's supported if you use other outside tools, but by default it's not supported. So that's the main reason that we moved to TestNG. I hope that answers the question. You're welcome. Are you using Docker for container issues? Yes. So our product, it's a Docker-based product, which means as a product we have multiple components, and each component is considered as a separate server, a separate service deployed in a container. So our product is based on multiple containers that are integrated with each other using Kafka. So we currently, and those components, they are also communicating with each other. There are APIs for each component that also we test internally. But mostly as an end-to-end test cases, you don't care about how the program is architected. We care about that when we do integration test, of course. But yeah, we use Docker as the container technology for the application that we have. You're welcome. Okay, go ahead. No, so we have different VMs, virtual machines, that are running on vCenter. So we use vCenter as a hypervisor technology for virtual machines. So we have different virtual machines, and to make sure that also we test on different operating systems. And on those virtual machines that has different operating systems, there are different browsers scattered among them. For example, when we test on IE, we have to have a Windows. Also, we have Windows multiple versions, and also when we have a Linux virtual machine, we have all different browsers like Safari and Firefox, etc. But no. So the answer is no. We don't use containers. We use virtual machines. Probably containers will be better because it's much lighter. But yeah, so far we are using virtual machines. Any other question, guys? Okay, so thank you very much. Çok teşekkür ederim for attending, and thank you, Omurdan, also for giving me the chance. If you still have any question in mind that pops up to your mind, you can just shoot me a meetup message, and I will be very happy to answer. Okay, you're welcome. And Omurdan, thank you again. I will share with you the slides, and then probably you can share them with the rest of the group.
Yes, okay. Then I will share with others.
All right. So thank you, guys. Take care, and hopefully to see you in person soon in Istanbul. İyi akşamlar, and take care.
Thank you, guys. Arkadaşlar, diğer etkinlik Ocak ayında olacak. Yakın zamanda etkinliği açarız. Ofiste olacak bu sefer. Kadıköy'e taşındık. Duymayan varsa tekrar edeyim. Kadıköy'deki ofiste görüşmek üzere. İyi akşamlar herkese.
İyi akşamlar. Teşekkürler Ömer'den.